Hi guys, welcome to U-Wrench. Today we're looking at the rear caliper and how to remove it if yours is seized. Let's take a look. Okay, so if you've got a seized caliper, first thing we want to do is jack the car up, and before you remove the wheel, what I did is just try to manipulate the wheel, obviously with the handbrake in the off position, otherwise the wheel will go nowhere, and see how easy it is to move the wheel. If your caliper is indeed seized, as you suspect that it is, it should be very hard, as it was for me, to move the wheel. So that's the first thing to do, and that'll give you the indication that you're definitely looking at the right thing. And then get your wheel removed to this stage here. Okay, so just for disclosure's sake, I've actually already removed this caliper. I've reassembled it, and you can see I've actually removed the rear brake pad here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the exact process that I had. Basically, this was clamped on with so much force, as we'll cover in just a second. It was actually very hard to get this caliper off, so I'm not going to put it back in. But what I'll do is I'll show you exactly the techniques that I use to get this off, and give you a couple of tips on how to remove it if you're struggling. So the first thing to consider when we've got a rear caliper that's seized is it's a very different situation to having a front caliper that's seized. On the front caliper, your piston here can just be pressed back into the body of the caliper. So you can kind of, once you've taken your bolts off, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit using a flathead screwdriver or a lever bar just to start to push that back in. However, on the rear caliper, it needs to be rewound. If you've got a typical setup such as we have on the Grand Caravan that we're working on here today, so you've got a little notch in there, and that's for actually rewinding the caliper. So you can't just push it straight back in. It actually needs to be kind of screwed back in, so that makes it a lot more difficult to get it removed. So when these things lock on the rear, they can be really tricky to get off. But let's look at the best ways of doing it. So now we've got our wheel removed. Again, as I mentioned before, we've actually removed the rear pad when we put this back together, just for the sake of the ease of the video. But when I originally took this off, I literally could, although I could just about move the wheel, it was tight. When I'm trying to manipulate the disc in this manner, just to spin the hub, I could not get this to move at all. It was absolutely rock solid. I couldn't do it by hand at all. So it really was locked on solid. So the first thing that we need to do is try and release any pressure that we can that's currently obviously on the disc created by the caliper. And the best way to do that is to actually remove the bolts that connect the caliper through into the carrier, these bolts at the back here. So that's the first thing we're going to do, and hopefully that will release just a tiny little bit of pressure. It's going to make it a little bit easier to get these off. So essentially what you've got here is you've got the actual caliper itself, that's this section right here, and then you've got what's called a carrier, which is this outer section right here. And you can see here we've got a bolt at the back just there, and that connects the caliper, goes through the caliper, and actually goes into a slide pin inside the carrier right here. So that's one of the bolts that we're going to be replacing. We have that top and bottom, and additionally just to the side of that here, this is the carrier bolts. This is what's connecting the carrier frame onto the hub. So that will be removed once we've got that out of the way. So for the rear bolt here, on the Grand Caravan we're working on today, it's a size 13. Obviously that will vary if you're working on a different type of car. You're going to get yourself quite a long wrench, and you'll notice as this bolt goes through, there's actually a second kind of nut that sits in the middle there, and you might find you'll have to counter hold this with a spanner if it starts to spin. Usually you can crack them off without that moving, so let's take a quick look. That's not too bad. But often you'll find it'll crack off, and then as you're starting to undo it, this one in the centre here will start to turn as well. If it does, just get the correct size spanner on there to counter hold it. So that's it. So we'll just get that unzipped now. And then come down to the lower bolt in exactly the same position, and just do exactly the same thing down here. So get that one removed as well. So next we need to remove the two carrier bolts here on the rear. On the Dodge Caravan Grand Caravan we're working on today, they are size 18s. There we go. Let's Remember, obviously you've got one of these at the top and one of these at the bottom, so we're going to get both of these removed. So the best way is to use a rubber mallet to tap this off. However, this is going to rely somewhat on the condition of your brake disc. As you can see, although these discs are a little old, as in a little bit rusty, they don't have much of a lip on them. There's a tiny little lip there, and this was fine. I didn't have to grind this off. If yours are quite deep, the pits on the disc are quite deep, and so you've got quite a big lip on the edge, obviously that lip is going to prevent you from pushing the pad off of the disc when you're tapping it with your rubber mallet. So if you have an instance where you've got quite a badly lipped disc, then what you want to do is get yourself an angle grinder and just carefully grind back the lip just here, and likewise just here on the back. And now obviously, depending on what car you're working on, we can see we've got a gap in the dust shield just here, so we can grind as much as we want off the front, but we can only grind that much at a time off of the back. And as we can see, this is not as wide as the pad. Pads are probably somewhere near kind of this kind of width, so we need to be able to grind it back a little bit deeper. So if you do have to grind, if your discs are in very good condition, grind as much as you can off the front. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to replace the disc anyway if they're that badly gone. Do what you can on the rear, and then use the wheel nuts. Hopefully, again, don't smash the hell out of it, just take your time with it. Hopefully you'll be able to manipulate that enough so that you can turn it around, grind out a second bit, and so you've got a bit of equal length, wider than the disc on both sides of the disc. And then once you're at that stage, you can then say your ground section is here. Obviously we need to rotate that down to where the brake pad is now, because the brake pad needs to slide off of that section. So again, you're going to need to manipulate it until you tap it until you've got the nice shiny bit that you've just ground off on both sides, level with the brake pads, and that's going to allow hopefully these brake pads to slide off, whereas if you left that lip on, that lip would lock them and you simply would not be able to get them off. Okay, so we've got all of the bolts removed now. Your caliper as it's seized will still be clamped on tight. As I explained before, we haven't got a second brake pad, so as is already nice and loose. We're just kind of replaying this for the sake of you guys watching this video. What I had to do was get a rubber mallet and just tap the whole assembly, top and bottom, and fraction by fraction, only move a few millimeters each time, until eventually slid off. We had the whole assembly came out pretty much together like that, to a point where it would just lift off, and that's the point where we got to. Now, it did take a little bit of work. It probably took 5 or 6 minutes probably of hammering it. And when you are hammering it, don't hammer the hell out of it, don't smash the hell out of your car. Give it nice firm encouragement, and hopefully it will do what you want it to do, but don't hit it so hard that you're going to kind of damage anything. And ideally use a rubber mallet, because you don't want to deform any of this metal, rather than a lump hammer, a steel hammer. So hopefully that'll get you to this stage right here. So that's how you remove the kind of caliper itself if it's seized on, ready for you to fit your new or reconditioned caliper. A couple of things to point out is, again, depending on what vehicle you've got, your setup's going to be very, very similar to this, but there are a few variations of doing it. But attached to this rear caliper, we're still going to have our handbrake cable, which we've got here. And of course we've got our brake line coming up to the rear here. A couple of very important things to discuss on both of these very quickly just before we sign off. So let's look at the handbrake cable first. Now, obviously the handbrake cable is going to have to be detached to allow you to fit your new caliper. Unfortunately, there's quite a few different methods of the way that these attach. We're working on a Dodge Grand Caravan here, but it might be completely different on the type of car that you're looking at. We're going to use this as an example. We've got a plastic cuff here with 2 tabs. So in theory, what you'd do on this, you'd squeeze these 2 together, feed the cuff back through the hole there. That would expose the cable itself. This metal panel's got a little slot in it. so it allows the cable to pass through the little slot, and then you simply unhook this end of the cable from this hook here on the caliper. On things like Audis, things like that, you've got a very similar method. This is a metal cuff right here, and it's got like a little clip that sits underneath it that needs to be kind of pushed out. This is a kind of a very kind of common way, but there are a few variations on how to do it, so you may need to look that up for your particular car. But with that in mind, obviously we're going to need to get this removed in the correct way, so you may need to do a little bit of Google research on that, but that's the first thing. Now the second thing is talking about your rear brake line, just in here. Now if you are replacing your caliper with a new or reconditioned caliper, you should definitely replace the rear brake hose. You may well find that the hose is the cause of the problem rather than the caliper itself. What can happen on these flexi hoses, they often have a spring on the inside which can corrode, or they can just kind of get a general build-up of dirt inside them. And what happens is you get a constriction, so it starts off at this wide, and you get the build-up in it, and that hole shrinks over years. And so it ends up acting as kind of a one-way valve. You hit your brake pedal, it pumps that fluid down into the caliper under pressure, but when you release the pressure, it doesn't pump it back under pressure, it just kind of pumps it back under its own kind of release pressure, if you like. So you're only kind of pumping it in under pressure when you press that brake pedal down. So if you've got a constriction in there, it will still force it, even though the hole might be very, very small, it's still, because it's under pressure, it will force it through that little hole, but it won't necessarily be able to come back out. And so that's when you start to get a caliper that will lock on. So in your particular case, if you found that your brake problem, maybe you've got a squeaking when you drive, something like that, if you found that it's got worse over the case of a few weeks or even months, then that could well be the brake line, so well worth doing that. But you should definitely never fit a brand new or a reconditioned caliper without replacing the brake line. The line's a lot cheaper than the caliper, so make sure that you do that. Just for reference, we're filming a full rear caliper replacement for this particular car, which is a Grand Caravan. So if you want a few more tips on the removal of the cable and the hose, again, they're all a pretty kind of common setup. No matter what make or model of your car, you can have a quick look at that as well. Just do a search on our channel for the Dodge Grand Caravan rear caliper replacement, and you should be able to find that video at all as well. We'll add a link for you below this video just in case you get stuck, but that's something definitely worth remembering, is this rear brake hose. Definitely replace that at the same time. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next video.